Hello and welcome to the Full FX Unfiltered. My name is Colin Lambert. I'm publisher of the Full FX, and this edition is in association with LSEG FX. And I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Leonard-Appleton, who is head of FX Risk and Regulation at LSEG. Chris, nice to see you.
Lovely to be here.
We've got quite an agenda to go through, I think, because your world is your world's quite busy, is how I'd put it. You probably are the busiest man in the world in London. I thought we'd kick off with a hot topic, which is T+1. Obviously, it's a very broad subject matter. In FX terms, there's been a lot of noise about this. We're getting closer as we speak. We're about 7 weeks away from the changeover. Where do you think the pressure points and the potential pain points are for our industry still?
Well, I think the pressure points are probably still the same ones that we've been talking about for some time. So, I think in particular, real money guys in APAC are the ones who are going to be most heavily affected by this. I think they're the ones who are still trying to work through, the operational complexity around this, the hedging complexity around this, and the funding problems around this. I think it's well quoted that if you're a Tokyo-based asset manager, you're effectively trading T1 on US securities today anyway because of the time differences. That pretty much goes down to T0. We know that with most trades in the US securities market, a lot of them are end-of-day orders, which are going through in New York. That really reduces things like the securities conversion times for a Tokyo-based asset manager from 24 hours to 3 hours. So I think really working through those complexities and those challenges is a pretty substantial pain point. And I think some of the things that we're seeing at the moment, we're obviously getting a lot of clients coming to us and asking, one example is whether we can move the refresh date on a Friday back an hour. Obviously that's of particular importance because if a trade occurs on the Friday, then all of the securities conversions and the processing now has to happen on a Saturday, so the more time they can get, those guys can get, the better. So, that's certainly one example that we're seeing of the market trying to move. There has been talk about whether we could move the 5 p.m. cutoff on a daily basis back to 6 p.m. New York. Less demand for that, but obviously those conversations are ongoing. So.
Which I guess actually in some ways that actually really impacts my domicile. Well, actually, the guy's 2 hours east of us, which is New Zealand, because you're suddenly in the middle of their day, and that does become a challenge, isn't it?
That's absolutely correct. You're basically curtailing their day by an hour. If you do the refresh, then you're really. At what point do you actually have the trade date start?
Yes, exactly. Yes,
You can't really have one time for New Zealand and then another date for Australia. So, I don't think we'll be doing that anytime soon. But certainly, the end of day refresh on a Friday is interesting because. Most bank systems rely on us rolling at 5 to then begin their refreshes within their systems on a Friday night. Pushing that back an hour just for us is technically challenging, but of course the downstream impacts are pretty sizable as well. So, that's not something we're going to be doing ahead of the 28th of May, or at least I very much doubt it. But it's something we'll continue to evaluate.
And that's an interesting point to me, actually, because it strikes me that the whole T+1 solution, which doesn't really exist, is actually going to be an ongoing process, isn't it? We're going to kind of learn on the job, but also, decisions will be made, way past May 28th.
I totally agree. I mean, it's a revolution that we respond to via evolution, I think. There's simply no way that we can change market structure in 7 weeks.
No.
So I think, things, as basic as operational issues like when we do refresh times, we'll just have to work through. And then, of course, there's more technical innovations that I know the industry's looking at. Atomic settlement is one of them, which, of course, sounds quite alluring, but actually doesn't really solve a lot of the underlying problems around how do you actually fund one part of a securities trade in time and things like that. So,
and it removes any benefits of netting.
Absolutely. The hedging issues. Actually, you compound the hedging issues because all of a sudden you can't hedge on a portfolio basis. So, absolutely.
Listeners will be pleased to hear we're not going to talk about T+1 the whole time because there is actually, it's a really interesting stage of the evolution in terms of regulation. And I wanted to ask you about potential divergences between, we're sitting in London, between the UK and the EU. and other global regulators. I mean, you could say T+1 is a headline act with thanks North America for going without us. But where are the other sort of divergences happening out there that we need to be aware of, do you think?
So I think Brexit has obviously brought up a number of divergences, and it's interesting when you look at what the UK is doing with its legal acquis. Just there aren't any big statutory divergences that we're seeing, but where we are seeing divergences are in the rules. Right. And I think a classic case in point at the moment is we've got the MiFIR rewrite going through at the moment. One of the big things that's changed in MiFIR is the removal of pre-trade transparency requirements for RFQ and voice trading systems. What we're seeing in the UK with the current FCA proposals is that actually they would do a carve out for negotiated trades. They sort of bundle RFQ and voice trading into the same bucket.
Yeah.
But the starting assumption seems to be pre-trade transparency would apply to those protocols, subject to carve-outs, whereas the Europeans are saying, well, it just won't across the piece.
Yeah.
So we're seeing these very subtle divergences, which, if you're trying to operate venues across both of those jurisdictions, become pretty big operational challenges because suddenly you've got to build different solutions within the same technology platform. So I think really with that particular one, what we would advocate at the moment is, unless there's significant benefit to the market from these divergences, sometimes having a less optimal rule, but everybody following the same rule is better than trying to have a really good one over there and a bad one over there and trying to apply both.
Yeah. I think that goes from a lot of things in life, doesn't it? Not just exactly. Regulation. So the other things I hear about is LEIs, legal entity identifiers, and potential differences there. Mm-hmm. I mean, is this something that we should be more aware of, perhaps?
So I think,
I speak as an old spot trader who's aware of literally nothing in this space. But
so I think this is actually where we're starting to see a bit more convergence now.
Right. Okay.
So I mean, if you I was thinking about this morning. We've travelled a long road since the Pittsburgh G20 session in 2009. If you look at the reporting changes that are coming through this year, so we've got EMEA in a couple of weeks now. We've got the UK, I think it's end of September, and then we've got ASIC changes coming up 24th of October, I think. Generally speaking, all of those regimes are moving in the same direction. And obviously we had the US CFTC changes occur last year and SEC changes. So if we look at things like unique product identifiers, if we look at unique trade identifiers, we look at the LEIs, I think some jurisdictions have gone further ahead than others.
Yep.
But ASIC, for example, hasn't really mandated use of UTIs up to now, hasn't really mandated use of LEIs up to now. Europe has been there for several years, and so is the UK. We're slowly getting to the same point, where we will have an ISO standard UPI, which by and large most regimes will adhere to within the next few years. Some already do. We will all move to the ISO standard for UTIs. I'm not geeky enough to tell you which ISO standard that is, but I think we're all moving to it. And we are now getting to the point where LEIs will be mandated as well. But it's taken time to get there. So actually, I think this is where we will see convergence.
Yeah.
I think what's tricky at the moment with a lot of these reporting changes is interpretation on some of the fields. So we know that in the EU and the UK, we're still using ISINs, for example, which come with their challenges because obviously the ISIN includes the maturity date within the methodology, so within the taxonomy, which means that you have hundreds of thousands of ISINs just for FX alone.
Yeah.
So I think a move to UPIs is sensible, albeit augmented with things like maturity date or expiry date. But we need to get to a point where we have a clean cutover, we retire the use of the ISIN and we switch to the UPI in general.
Yep.
Until we get to that point, it's going to be incredibly costly to support both identifiers, and it's just going to be confusing. We've got a lot of clients saying, well, for EMEA, if we trade on FX all, should we be using UPI or ISIN? Now, we're quite clear you should be using ISIN, the rules state that. But of course, a lot of clients are saying, well, we should be using UPI, and why aren't you guys providing one? So, until we can get to more convergence on this, there's going to be a lot of confusion, I think.
The only thing I will take out of that is, when we do get to this convergence, it really sounded like you're talking about a regulation that might make our life easier.
Yeah, let's have an omnibus.
That's a rare thing. That's a rare thing in this world, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think the likelihood might be low.
Yeah.
But let's see.
Yeah. Expectation levels low. Hopefully, we'll be pleasantly surprised.
Exactly.
The other sort of big bit of sort of regulatory or structural regulatory changes in DORA. I'm going to have a go now. Digital Operational Resilience Act.
Spot on.
Oh.
Yeah.
How about that? So obviously, this does require me. We're rolling out new technologies, almost by the month. We'll probably get to AI. I believe we're contractually, expected to talk about AI. But with all the changes happening in technology at such a pace, how is the industry responding to DORA?
It's a really good question. I think it's funny. I was talking to some people in the industry, and I think there's some firms that have set up project teams. There are some firms that have set up project teams that manage the project teams, and there are some organisations that have actually got on with implementation. So, I think with DORA, this is going to be one of those ones where you get to the last 3 months, and suddenly we're going to have clients waking up and saying, we need a contract with you guys, we need an annex with you guys, we need a SOP report, whatever it might be. I think generally speaking, what I'd urge participants to be doing is really thinking about who are our critical ICT service providers, who might we need a contract with, and let's enter those negotiations now, because we haven't got that long. We've got until next January now. I think there's a lot of confusion around how some of these ICT risk frameworks should be applied by firms who are DORA directly applies to. We've obviously got things like very high bars for penetration testing, very high bars for ICT incident responses. All of these things take a lot of tooling. They all require process uplifts, and it just takes time. So I'd say to those firms, and I have some sympathy to them, because actually we might be the ones who need a project management team to manage our project managers at the moment.
See, I mean, for those of a certain age, I'm going to Life of Brian here. When I need a decision, and all of a sudden, okay, we need a decision. Let's have a meeting.
Yeah, exactly. Let's have a committee to discuss the committee.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But it's one of those ones where I think, unfortunately, it's going to be a slow burn until it's not. And then suddenly there's going to be a huge rush of people suddenly realising, just how much work is required here. And that's not before we even get to sort of the uplifts that are required to our infrastructure. And then, of course, I think for the ICT service providers, there's a lot of ICT service providers who are used to this now because of the outsourcing requirements and the European Banking Authority guidelines and things like that. There's a lot of service providers who are smaller and probably not necessarily caught up with this. And the problem is those guys need time. Because if you suddenly call them up and say, right, we need to uplift our contract with you to include these new clauses, I guarantee the first response is going to be her. And then the second response is going to be go away.
Yes.
So, you're probably going to need about 3 or 4 calls before you get to it.
And when you don't go away, it'll be, oh no.
Exactly. So if you're dealing with an AWS or someone like that, I don't mean to name drop, but these bigger organisations are very sophisticated. They're set up for this. But I think smaller service providers will need more time to get ready.
And the fact is, we, as an industry, we have become more reliant on third-party providers.
Absolutely.
Over the years, as little service nuances have come in.
Yeah, which is why the regulators are so focused on outsourcing as an example. So, it's critical we get those bits right.
Yeah. So to fulfil our contractual obligation, we'll bring AI into it. I'm actually, rather than talk about, maybe we can go as intricately as you like on this, but I'm quite interested in you as an opinion to start with in terms of AI. Obviously, there's a huge debate out there in society, not just in markets. But is AI potentially a game changer for that sort of risk and regulation world, or is it just an ever increasing challenge?
Well, personally, I'm a huge advocate of AI. I think if properly regulated with the correct kinds of controls in place, I think it can be a game changer, personally. In reg and risk, if you think about just the purely mechanical ways that we calculate risk, RCA processes, control enhancement programs, all this sort of stuff, I think AI could be a huge boost to that sort of analysis. We know that in trading workflows, there are some significant opportunities there to rationalize the trade workflow from start to finish. I think the critical thing to get right here is data, because we know that AI has a voracious appetite for data. One, you need to make sure that the integrity of the data is correct.
Yep.
Because if AI is using data that's incorrect, wrong, dare I say it, misleading,
Yep.
then you're going to come out with a bad response. And given the speed at which this happens, you just need to be able to mitigate that. I think the other issue that the industry is going to have to deal with is one of IP. Data ownership has always been a bit of an issue. It's going to become far more important now as AI models become more prevalent. Obviously, the use of data, the velocity of that use of data is just going to increase.
Yeah.
One can quite easily see the potential for a lot of court cases here where a bank or an asset manager is going to a vendor or an AI user and sort of saying, well, you're using our data and we want recompense for that.
Yeah.
So, I think actually agreeing up front on the ownership rights of data will be quite critical.
Is that something the industry does itself, do you think? FX is particularly good at self-regulated and has been over the years. Is this something that actually the industry can get in front of the regulators so they hopefully will just look at it and go, actually, we're quite happy with how that goes?
I think the industry has a huge part to play, absolutely, because the industry is just probably a few steps ahead of the regulators at the moment, albeit the regulators are catching up very quickly. So we're seeing this with the FX Code of Conduct as an example, where I think with good intentions, the industry can achieve huge results. I think this could be one as well, where we start to really think thoughtfully about what standards should be in place to manage the outputs from AI.
There is, just to close out, there's one bigger threat to AI you didn't cover there, and that is the danger of turning up in a room with me and being asked intelligent questions.
Didn't have time to prep for that one.
No, exactly. It's a fascinating part of our world now, and I never thought I'd hear myself say those words, but it actually is because the way we view risk is changing. New risks are emerging. And regulation can sometimes be a blunt instrument.
Agreed.
So I think it's actually there seems to be there's a lot more nuances to come. There's not going to be that boilerplate stamped model. This is how we're going to work. Is that a fair observation?
I think that's a very fair observation. I'd make one additional point. You sort of mentioned risks. We talk about emerging risks. AI will be on everyone's emerging risk threat matrix at the moment. Certainly on ours.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about AI is that actually can help us with those threat matrices.
Yes.
Because it's always going to think of something we haven't.
Yeah.
So, I like to always look at the benefits of this.
Yeah. Well, because there was a thing in the UK when they did an experiment, I believe it was last year, where they actually got the AI to deliberately lie.
Yes.
To the AI thing. So it's been one of those things where I guess ultimately you're probably employing people with psychology degrees coming out saying, okay, explain to me exactly where this thing is actually going differently.
Psychology degrees and rocket scientists.
Yes.
I think.
That's a party we all want to go to, isn't it? Yeah.
Throw in a regulator and you're there. Exactly. A regulatory person.
Yes, exactly. Chris, great to talk to you today. Thank you for that. And actually, my eyes have been opened a bit more there, which is what I always love. Great. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Colin. It's
we'll
been a
do
pleasure.
it again soon, hopefully. And thanks everyone for watching, and we'll be back again soon. Thanks a lot.